But thank you all so much for joining us. Best-selling author Carter Wilson will discuss his new thriller, Tell Me What You Did, in conversation with best-selling author Wendy Walker in tonight's installment of Author Hour in Massachusetts. So Carter Wilson is the USA Today best-selling author of 10 critically acclaimed standalone psychological thrillers, as well as numerous short stories. He is an ITW Thriller Award finalist, a 5-time winner of the Colorado Book Award, and his works have been optioned for television and film. Additionally, Carter is the host of Making It Up podcast and founder of the Unbound Writer Company, which provides coaching services, writing retreats, and online classes. He lives in Erie, Colorado, in a Victorian house that is spooky but isn't haunted yet. And Wendy Walker, tonight's conversation partner, tonight's moderator, is the internationally best-selling author of multiple psychological thrillers, including All Is Not Forgotten, Don't Look for Me, and What Remains. She has sold rights to her books in 23 languages, as well as film and television options. Wendy also writes original pieces for Audible, including American Girl and Mad Love. So, with all that said, for everyone watching live and those watching the recording, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Carter and Wendy for being with us tonight. And Wendy, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you everybody for being here on a Friday evening, afternoon, wherever you're coming from. This is so much fun. Oh my gosh. Carter and I are old friends from different writing conferences. So I have a lot of questions and we'll dive in.
Thanks for
But
doing this. That's so it's so
sure.
and for a little bit of context, it's so great for writers to be friends because there's even been instances where I've called you. I'm like, hey, I need advice. Or a shoulder to
Yeah.
cry on, and because there's only so many people we can talk to with our particular issues, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's so true. I mean, that's a whole topic of conversation is the writing community. I was just telling someone today, like, how, what goes on in behind the scenes of being
Mhm.
an author and what our lives actually look like compared to what we probably thought they would look like.
I'm running out of money.
Yeah, I'm right, I'm right. I don't have any more pajamas. I only have 10 pairs and they're all in the wash. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's kind of, and then, we get together a few times a year at these conferences and it's like we've known each other forever because
Totally.
yeah, we all sort of have this one little chip in our brains that likes to write dark thrillers. So on
Right.
that note, let's dive into, I have my copy. Tell me what you did. And I'm gonna let you give like the elevator pitch so I don't do
Yeah,
any spoilers. So do
sure.
that and then we're gonna dive in.
Sure. So Tell Me What You Did essentially tells the story of 30-year-old Poe Webb. And Poe hosts pretty much the number one ranked true crime podcast in the country. And the conceit of the podcast is that callers can call in and anonymously confess to crimes they've committed in their past. And if Poe believes them, then she keeps them on the line. They have a conversation about the criminal mind. And then she gets a call one day from a caller, and his confession is that he killed Poe's mother. And of course, Poe knows that her mother was in fact murdered when Poe was only 13. But she's not sure if this is the person who did it or not. And she's got her own dark secrets. And so it becomes a very kind of cat and mouse thing between the caller and Poe, ultimately where the caller wants Poe to confess her own past sins on her own show.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for doing that because I would have spoiled way too many things with
There's
my.
more spoilers literally on the back cover copy,
I
but
know. That's why I was like,
I
"Ooh,
know.
are we allowed to say that?" So we won't. Just everybody can go and get it and read the back cover if you want spoilers before reading. Um, so, oh my gosh, where to begin? First of all, share the exciting news about Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, so Tell Me What You Did was selected by Barnes& and Noble as their monthly pick for mystery suspense, which means it's in healthy quantities in every store in the country for the month of February. So I'm super honored and grateful for that.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible uh, you know, opportunity to get your books. I mean, this is Barnes and Noble, like online and in every store everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just such a huge accomplishment, and it really speaks to the quality of this book. And I want to get into the plot and why everyone should read the book, but then I want to talk about why, as a writer, I thought this was one of the best books that I've read in
Oh,
a really
thank you,
long
Wendy.
time. No, like real. I'm not. We both read tons of thrillers, great plots, great characters. But I really want to talk about how this book is written after we talk about the juicy plot. So the first thing that struck me um, is that you just went for it on the setup. Like you just dove into this really brutal murder of Poe's mother when she was 13 that she witnessed. And you just like went there. I don't want to give any spoilers about how gruesome this murder is. It's not, and this is not like if it's not that it's written in such detail or there's nothing gratuitous, but it's a brutal murder. And I feel like, when we all sit down to write novels now, crime novels, I at least am always thinking like, oh my gosh, is that too dark? Have I gone
Mhm.
too dark? Because that is sort of my tendency. And this book required there to be this incredibly dark, impactful scene that this young girl witnessed for the rest of the story to take place. And I
Yeah.
just want to know, like, did you have any hesitation where you like, was that the first thing that came to your mind? How did that come to be?
Yeah, it wasn't the first thing that came. In fact, I mean, most of the book doesn't come to mind because I don't outline. So
I
I
know.
don't
We can
know
talk about
what's
that too.
happening. And I didn't even know Poe's mother had been murdered for some time into the book. And then I went back and changed stuff. And what happens especially when you're writing, I think first person present tense, and you have a history that this person has gone through, what I hesitate doing is through exposition, kind of revealing what happened, right? So I decided there was some point in the book where we needed to travel back and see through her eyes, first person, present tense, what she witnessed as a 13-year-old. And I didn't really hesitate because I knew the brutality had to be there in order for her to justify her reaction to it. Because I think, as you know, like I think with thriller, everyone thinks thriller's suspense. It's got to be a twisty plot. It's got to be great character development. But I think the truth is, it's got to be emotion forward. And because if I'm not invested in my characters because I'm not emotionally connected to them, then I don't really care what happens to
Yeah.
them. So I wanted to display trauma
Yes.
because it explains how any trauma survivor has reactions to that, and I think you need to understand the context in order to understand the reactions.
So if it didn't start there, where did this, when you sat down to write, what was it, what were you writing if it did not start there? Like it started with the concept of the podcast, or what was the initial seed for the book?
Yeah, my friend and I used to exchange podcast recommendations. And he came up to me one day. He's like, "Hey, have you heard this one podcast?" And he was describing a podcast where callers can call in to a voicemail and leave an apology for somebody. And I guess the podcast would just play these apologies. And I thought that was pretty creative. And then I immediately thought, well, what if it was a confession, not an apology? And then you know that thing when, as an author, when you get those little goosebumps and
Yes.
you're like, oh,
Ooh.
there's something there. And I was probably in the middle of my previous book. So I'm like, all right, if 4 or 5 months from now I'm still thinking about this, I don't write anything down, then I'm going to explore it. So I knew it was going to be a confessional podcast. And then that pretty quickly comes to light of like, well, who's the host and why did the host start this podcast? And I started thinking about the idea of the podcast being a form of therapy for her. And then I'm like, well, why is it therapeutic? I'm like, oh, what is she hiding? So those were kind of the roots of it. But things, as you know, when you're writing, things just pop in your head. And I think it's your subconscious working, telling you this, now this. And I just kind of followed the guide of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you never know that you don't plot. I'm a plotter. For those of you who haven't heard these terms before, there are plotters and then what they call pantsers, writers who fly by the seat of their pants. And I think in reality, nobody's a purist on that. It's
Right.
really in my mind how we start the book because I plot, but I will always have those moments and then I go back and I make adjustments. But I really, the only time I started writing without a plot, it was a disaster. I ended up 50 pages in and I had not left like the first scene. I had
Right.
like
Because that's the
five
only thing you
chapters. I'm like,
knew.
but there's more. Wait, there's more in this scene that I'm experiencing, and I'm going to share it with you right now in the first third of the book. And it was a disaster.
Yeah.
But I think for all of us, we go back and forth. But to construct a book like this without plotting just like sort of boggles my mind because as you said it is a trauma study. You have a character who has such a clear voice and it's her voice throughout the entire book even though there are multiple time frames that are explored and there's also the podcast. Oh my gosh, we have to talk about that too. There are chapters where it's the podcast sort of happening in real time and it's a transcript.
Right.
um, so that was amazing. But so you had this idea for the podcast and when did you decide it was going to be a woman? Because actually, you write a lot about traumatized from the head of a traumatized woman.
Mhm.
And we won't ask more questions about that, but you do it very, very well.
Oh,
And I
thank you.
remember us having a conversation about it one time because you were working on a rewrite
Oh
for,
God,
I
yeah.
can't remember which book it was, but it
Yeah.
was, and it ended up being, I think it ended up being amazing. I think it was
Father she went to find. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So what is it that draws you to writing in this sort of urgent first person, present tense female voice?
Yeah, I think it just comes over time. And same thing with like plotting or pantsing. I totally recommend aspiring authors to try both and then find out what your brain does.
Yes.
Because I like you, I've tried outlining and within literally 2 pages, I had a better idea. And so it just doesn't work for me. And I remember after my third book, I remember getting a lot of feedback from people who knew me saying that my male protagonist, just sounded a lot like me. And I just didn't like that feeling. I wanted to be in another totally different voice than my own. So I started writing more from a female perspective. And I found it was very freeing. And then I think in my fifth book is when I first started doing first person present tense. And I remember that just flowed out of me. And I do think that when you find the POV and the tense that flows out of you, I think that's synonymous with finding your voice. Because all of a sudden I'm like, this is my voice. This is this urgent. I'm in this person's head, which I do think takes a decent amount of empathy to do that, but it just felt very comfortable for me. And I think the key for me with writing, a gender different than my own is not to overthink it, to
Yeah.
not sit there and think like, what would a woman do in this situation? What would a man do? Just like, this is a very traumatic situation. What would a human being do? And of course you know, I'm surrounded by smart women who read my manuscript, who give me, no lack of feedback. So
Right.
I've got a lot of good voices, counseling me.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting that it freed you up from sort of being too much in your own like worrying that it's your own personality coming out. And I actually, the first thriller I wrote, All Is Not Forgotten, it's the only book I've written in the uh, point of view of a man. And
How did that feel?
it was amazing. It was like seamless. I loved it. And he's like not a very likable character. This was
Right.
this is when you could really dive into an unlikable narrator for the whole book, and nobody minded. Now I feel like we've trended a little bit away from that, but
Huh.
um, he tells the entire story, and ironically, that's the only book where people have come to me and said I had to put it down because it was too much like you. When I was
That's really interesting.
like, oh
Wow.
no.
So you're
Um,
saying everyone thought you were unlikable, or?
well, no, they just all this his pontifications and the way he spoke,
Yeah,
or I guess sort of
that's
sounded like
funny.
me. So
Yeah, I think you try
yeah,
different things. I think that's
yeah,
important. And sometimes it's disastrous, and sometimes you find out nuggets of like, oh, I really enjoy this. And I think if you find that joy while you're writing,
yes,
then that results in better work. I just think if you don't overthink it, if you trust the story, whether it's in your head already or slowly coming out, and just have the confidence to be like, I'm just going to see where this goes, then I think good things happen.
I agree with that. And then there are moments too when I think it's good to to stretch yourself a little bit, and uh, and if you have trusted readers, and then you can do that. Like, does this really sound like a young girl, or does this
Right,
really sound like
right.
a whatever? And so that's really important too. So I want to so oh my God, I have so many questions about the structure, but I'm like holding back because I want to make sure we cover all the plot stuff first. So we have Poe. The other thing that I noticed is there are very few characters in this book. We
Right.
have Poe, we have her boyfriend,
Yeah. Who's also
father,
her like
podcast partner,
podcast.
right? So you're like two birds with one stone there. And Kip, and then her father, and then of course this mysterious man who wants to be on her podcast, and some characters who sneak in here and there, but that's pretty
Right.
much
That's
it,
pretty
right?
much it. Yeah. Yeah. There's an appearance by a character from an older book of mine, Alice Hill,
Yes.
who has definitely a secondary role, but not as small as like, a barista that she interacts with for 2 seconds. But yeah, I'm a big fan of few characters, but then hopefully you develop them and their relationships enough that they're worth following. And maybe that's just because I get confused when there's too many characters.
Well, because it does become difficult. It becomes difficult to develop them all. And
Right.
especially if you have, if it is really an in-depth character study in a way,
Yeah.
then you get distracted by too much plot, right? And having to describe these characters. Um, and this is a little bit of an aside, but I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, writer, and I know a lot of us are like just like seeing what like AI is going to be doing, right, to the writing world. And we start to see writers who have fed a chapter into AI, and it comes back. Sometimes it'll rewrite it for you if you want, or it'll come back with suggestions. And what was so interesting is that she did this experiment, and just to see, what would happen. And it was a book that was already published. So and and she was like, "Oh my God, like I should I have done these things?" Like,
Mm.
and AI had like every little character who was mentioned, AI had like suggested how to develop that character. Oh, why don't you give that one an accent or whatever? And I'm like, no, that character is just like that, like the not even the barista. It's like that character you never see again. It's just
Right.
like
Right.
somebody who they need to interact with, like to rent a car or
Right.
something. And now
Totally.
you're going to give that character like an accent or spend time on that character. And now the reader is thinking, oh, I better pay attention to this character because the
Totally.
been given a unique accent or something identifiable. And so that's a commentary on AI, which is a whole other topic. But on characters and limiting characters, I think there is something to that. Because even in this, like I feel like the bulk of the development was really on Poe, and 90%, like
Right.
90%, um,
Totally.
even with those few other characters. So I thought that was really interesting. Um, and Okay, I'm going to get into structure in a minute because that's really what I want to talk about. I want to geek out on writing. But why did you decide to set it in Burlington? Was there any, because you're from a snowy place. I'm like, wait,
Yeah.
why are we in, but why
Yeah.
are we in Burlington, Vermont? Was there a connection to that? Because it was fun to like, I think you did a really good job of making it a little bit sort of atmospheric. There is that quality to it in some of the points of view.
Yeah, yeah, I'm from Colorado, and just like I don't like my protagonists to sound like me, I write standalones only. I don't write series. I love going to places I don't really know. And I remember with my fifth book, Mr. Tinder's Girl, I was looking for a book to set a Halloween-ish kind of a story, and I kind of just came to the conclusion that New England is creepy. No offense to Massachusetts. And so I write a lot of my books set in New England, and Vermont's a place that my partner and I have kind of talked about long term, perhaps moving to. And so it was kind of an ode to that of like, I wanted to explore Burlington a little bit and just set a book there. So it's more fun than anything else.
So did you go and spend time there when you knew you were going to be writing about it, or was this all from memory? Because I know you have a busy life, right? So
Yeah, it was all from memory. When I did go to New Hampshire when I wrote Mr. Tinder's Girl and just kind of skulked about and decided whose house was whose and all that
yeah,
fun stuff, just to
yeah.
get kind of the general mood. But it's also important to me. I usually set things in not large cities. I want kind of a smaller community that's not so tiny that everybody knows everything.
Yeah.
But a good mid-sized New England town is just ripe for creepy things to happen, I think.
Yes, I live in New England, so yes. And
Exactly.
I mean, and most of my books are set in Connecticut because for most of the years I've been writing, I've had like three kids at home. And so I was either going from memory,
Right. Or you could go
just,
somewhere quickly. Yeah.
yeah, or just, and the setting was never really, only one of my novels, I think, as a setting really becomes like a character.
Yeah.
Well, maybe yes. So now that this book has taken off, you will have the luxury of going to new places
I hope so.
exploring. Yeah, I mean, this is yeah, this book is really flying off shelves, and it's so exciting to see. And I want to geek out on the writing of it because I honestly like I've read I think almost all of your books, if not all of them, and they're always compelling, and there's always the characters always draw you in. And honestly, it's the characters I remember more than the plot twist
Totally.
at the end.
Yeah.
Like even, I some of the endings I will actually not remember, not because they're not memorable, but because that wasn't the point of the book. The point of the book was really the journey of these characters. All right. So, but what I want to say about this book to everyone out there and why you have to read this book is because when you read it, you will not notice any of the things that I want to just touch on here about the structure, unless you're a writer or you're interested in the writing process. But the structure of this is absolutely flawless. Like there is, like you're propelled forward like just seamlessly. There's no, it's not like, oh, I'm going to finish one more chapter. Okay, good. And put a, dog ear on or whatever. It is just like boom, boom, boom. I mean, you're halfway through the book and you need, before you even look up.
Hmm.
And there are a few things about it, I think, that I noticed, but I'm curious, like when you sat down, if you had this evil plan, and I know you don't plot, but I know you may have had a plan in writing it. First of all, the chapters are super short,
Yeah.
like a few pages at
Right.
most, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that in your mind? Like, I'm going to intentionally write these really, really short chapters.
I mean, I think that's just part of my evolution as a writer. And again, kind of over time finding my voice. And I've probably been doing that for a few books now. And, you're writing something and there's that sentence that feels like it, you just have an intuition about it. Like this sentence feels like it has some kind of gravity. And then that to me, sometimes I'm like, all right, let's end the chapter there. And the next chapter might just pick up right there. But it's kind of, for me at least, telling me like, what this person just said is important, even though it's not a cliffhanger necessarily. But the funny thing about it is you get comments from readers who say, I was up all night reading it because I looked and I only had a page left in the chapter. So I decided, okay, I'll finish this chapter. And then I realized the next chapter is only 3 pages. So I did that. And then all of a sudden they're like spoon feeding. And that's not intentional at all, but it is a nice little consequence as people kind of tear through it. And if you look at the book, it's a thick book, but it's only 85,000 words, but it's just a lot of short sentences, a lot of one sentence paragraphs, a lot of dialogue. So it's I think it's highly consumable.
Yeah. And yeah, that is 100% true. I mean, that's how I was reading it. But the other thing I want to talk about is the structure of I guess the timelines and the points of view. So how you have the podcast transcript, which is happening. I guess that is the most
the transcript of a conversation that happens at the end of this book.
Exactly. So that is sort of what, and then it skips to 2 weeks ago when she first gets the call from this man who wants to be on the podcast, and you get a glimpse into her life, and the plot's moving a little bit, there's nothing, too much has happened up until this point. She gets the call, this man wants to be on the podcast, but she's sort of humming along doing her podcast. She has her, her podcast manager and is whatever their date. It's just everything. There's nothing urgent.
It's establishing her life, kind of.
Exactly. But that's just 2 weeks. And then that slowly marches forward. And then we have the transcript of the podcast itself, which we know doesn't happen until the very end of the book. And then there is, we have her actually commenting. So we go into the podcast, but we're in her point of view. We're not in the transcript. And she is describing sort of what's going on in her head and in that podcast. Right. And then we go back in time to different points in her life in real time.
Right.
And the plot, but when you're reading it, the plot is just, you're learning things the way you need to learn them for everything to make sense. So it's not like you have to hold in your head, like, okay, don't forget this happened in the podcast because I need to remember that, to make sense of the plot. It's completely seamless the way you dole out all of the pieces of information that we need to get. That's how I don't understand how you didn't plot this out. So I want to know like how that construction came to be.
I mean, so I write linear, right? So everything you read is the order in which I wrote it. So even the transcripts, which is, you can put it all together as one long transcript.
Yep.
I only wrote those sections as I got to them. So you start to have an intuition of like, because almost I needed the information because I didn't know what was happening. So you start to get to the point, you're like, okay, well, what did happen to her mother? I don't know. Let's write the next chapter and find out. And so it's a method of delivering information to me. So therefore it's a method of delivering information to the reader. And that's not to say a lot of it doesn't get changed in the editing, right? You realize like, oh, maybe this fits better here. But when I think back, like not too much of the structure changed in the editing. Most of my editing, especially comments from my editor, was like fleshing out some of those secondary characters more because it is so Poe centric. And I think originally Kip wasn't even her boyfriend. Kip was just the podcast assistant. And so I decided to make that into a little bit more of a meaningful relationship. But yeah, the structure just kind of unfolds. And I don't know how to credit that.
No, it's really, well, maybe that is the product of creating the story while you write, because like you said, there's no choice but to then ask yourself what happened or why is she like this, and then you can write a chapter about that. But it was, and I loved it so much, and that it just made the reading experience uh, just so seamless, and you could really just enjoy the deep dive into Poe's state of mind and getting snippets from the past, but also being with her in the present and seeing what's going to happen to her in the future and sort of having that anticipation
Right.
and like worried about her and wondering like, well, when is she going to figure it out and will she get out of it? So um really the structure of it is flawless. It's really such a brilliant book. Everyone needs to go and get it.
Well, and I remember when I sat down to write, because you referenced earlier, kind of with the father she went to find, that was a real, that was more, I don't want to say it's more of a complex book, but it was more of a struggle for me. And it was a lot of rewrites, and it was changing tense and not, not trusting myself, and then, failing because of that. So I remember when I went to sat down to write, Tell Me What You Did, I keep a little side Word document that where I just, when things occur to me, I just throw notes, and it's just a mess of a document. And it's just kind of a brain dump. But always at the top of the document, I write down what my mood is for the book. And because I think tone and mood and emotion propels whatever the story is. And I remember being so exhausted from the previous book that I'm like, this is just going to be a straightforward, in your face, angry book.
Yeah.
And it should be scary. I remember writing those things, and they're still in that document.
Yeah.
So that was the place that I started from. So I'm like, I don't know who this character is, but I know she's angry. And then that just helps me propel the story, kind of knowing what her state of mind is.
Yeah. No, well, it was maintained throughout, and even the sections that go back in time, that anger is there, or you are experiencing the event that made her so angry and that
Right.
derailed her life. So yeah, and it was great too because the scenes where she's younger, you know, her it changed a little bit, so you felt like you were with her at an earlier stage of life, and at the it was just you felt like you were on the journey with her. So I thought that was such just really was the best sort of container to tell the story.
Oh, thank you.
It was amazing. And then talk about the QR codes, because this is, I think, a kind of a new thing that is happening, and I've seen it. I don't maybe one other book.
Oh, have you? That's cool. Yeah, I
Let me think.
haven't.
Maybe uh it may have been an audio. It may have been an
Clip
audio
or something.
or something. Yeah.
Oh,
But no,
okay.
it's really unique, and I love, so tell everybody about that.
Yeah, so I've used multimedia in a number of my books, never QR codes, but I've had websites built around this fake premise of a website. I've had art commission that I've been able to use in the book if it was relevant to the story. And in the book, in Tell Me What You Did, Poe, basically records her podcast with video, but then she promises to delete the video after a week unless the federal authorities come looking for it because of whoever confessed a crime. But what she doesn't tell her guests is that she always records her side of the conversation with her iPhone. So she has a position behind her monitor, so it's looking at her. And she goes through some pretty emotional moments while on the podcast. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, I want to see what this looks like. And I hired an actress who I had gotten to know a little bit because she had read some of my books. And I said, hey, if I give you some money, will you do some scenes for me? And you just have to record with your iPhone because that's what the character does. So it doesn't have to be quality. Here are the pages because you're basically just your side of the conversation from the scene that you just read. And then she just knocked it out of the park. And then I packaged that video as kind of recovered evidence from the Vermont State Police. And I'm like, all right, I have no idea if the editor's going to I have no idea. I've never seen this done before. It's more for my amusement. And then I asked my editor, I'm like, hey, here's a weird question. And then she's like, yeah, we can totally put that in. So I'm like, really? So it's, and I did my acknowledgments as a video as well. And it's been kind of fun because I can actually track how many people are scanning the codes. Like today I looked and it's like 243 people scanned your codes today. I'm like,
Wow,
That's
that's
cool.
so cool. Oh my gosh.
I mean, and these videos are just sitting on my Google Drive, so I have to remember not to delete them or anything.
Oh my gosh. When so people are so they well, that's all technical, but so they just scan it and it goes just to your
It goes to a video. Yeah, it goes straight to a video that's hosted on my on Google Drive server.
Oh my God.
Um, and there's a phone number in there as well that if you call, it's a real working phone number with a voicemail. That's pretty creepy. So
Yeah.
my
Oh,
phone blows up with like getting like just like someone's calling, someone's. I'm like, what is this?
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I mean the work I do for with Audible, which are there
Right.
are like audio plays and there's sound effects and there are you get to play with that kind of stuff
It's
with
so much fun, isn't it?
so
It's
much
world
fun.
building with multimedia, and I love that
Yes.
stuff.
Yes, it's really, really fun and it's really effective here because it's like, oh, you take a little break and then you're like, ooh, and then you can have another like a visualization that stays with you. So I thought that was really fun. And I want to just talk a little bit about everything else that you do in this wonderful writing community. So you have your podcast, Making It Up, and then you have um it's Authors Unbound
It's
and
Unbound Writer.
Unbound Writers, and I should know that because I've been on it. Uh, and and it's sort of been evolving, right, over a
Yeah.
few years. So where are you with it now, and what like if people wanted to, follow or just, use that resource, what is available there?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I love teaching to the extent that I feel, it took a while to get to the confidence feeling like I had something to say, of course, because we're
Yeah.
all, imposter syndrome riddled writers. Um, but I love especially teaching on the psychology of writing because I went through so many struggles myself, feeling a lack of confidence and not understanding the industry. And so I teach a lot on that. So at Unbound Writer, you can do one-on-one, coaching with me, and I offer free consultations. We've launched a few online classes, and we're going to be launching more. And I think you're going to be helping with one of those. So I'm super excited for that, as well as seminars and workshops. So yeah, it's. I feel like I'm juggling a lot, but and it's just a lot of marketing and trying to figure out how to message people and make them aware of it. But it's when you're working with somebody, it's just my brain just starts going. I love it. It's just so much fun.
Yeah, I think there's there's something really great about even when I have a friend who calls me and has a plot, is a plot bump, a speed bump in their plot, like, even, how can I have this person be dead, but then they're blah, whatever, and
Right.
when it's not your book and you can flex those muscles that and use those tools that you've acquired after writing many novels, but it's not the material that you've been like churning in your
Right.
brain, so it's like,
Right.
right,
Right.
it's like fresh material,
Totally.
and you realize like, oh my gosh, I have all these tools in my brain, that I can
Right.
actually. And so I think it's amazing when that you are sharing that with the writing community and that people have that resource, because it's much different to work with somebody in person than even to, use an online resource or read a course. Um,
Yeah.
just
I think
something,
so.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And as not to be too practical about it, but as well as I do, like it's you got to figure out ways to make a living writing, and that doesn't mean you
yes,
just sit there as a solitary creature and hammer out novels because it might not sell. It might take a year and a
yes,
half before it gets published. What are the ways can I do something that I absolutely adore and love, and I can monetize it?
yeah.
So you have to be a little bit entrepreneurial about it, I think.
No, I completely agree, and and it's also a lot of energy, the writing process when it's your own novel, and it's there are moments of great joy, but then moments where you just, I mean, I have days where I'm so mentally exhausted from having to, come up with new material at the end of the day,
Right.
and it
Right.
may only be like 4 hours or 6 hours of really productive work, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I never in my other jobs, I never really felt that kind of exhaustion
Right.
from just trying to come up with new material, but then switching gears to somebody else's material or reading a book or, whatever, helping edit something else that's not your own.
Right.
It's a totally different experience.
Totally.
So it's great, I think, to supplement. And then, you also get to hone your skills as well.
And I think the reason it's so exhausting as a writer on your own stuff is because you can't phone it in, right?
Yes.
And you can do that. Like not with other writers, but with maybe a day job, there's how much stuff you can phone in,
Yes.
and you're on autopilot, and it's just your subconscious running a routine. And when you're writing, you can't do that. And if you do that, it'll show in the work.
Yeah.
You have to really be so thoughtful and so present in the moment. And that's like meditating for like hours a day in a way.
Yeah,
You're like, I'm exhausted.
I can't meditate for 10 minutes. So that's
Right,
like,
exactly.
but no, I've never heard somebody describe it that way, but that's exactly what it is. It's the level of concentration.
Right.
That is required to put those words on the page, or even, to restructure and edit and think about everything that you've said and hold all of the story pieces together.
Right.
You're right. You have to be fully present to remember everything that's happened in this story and the whole.
And that's exxhausting. I don't know how anyone does it.
Why do we do this, Carter? My God.
That's why I only write an hour a day.
I know. I can't believe you only do I mean, that boggles my mind. I don't know. I would never finish an. But it is true. If you write a page a day, you'll have a novel in a year. So that is, somebody once told me that, and I was like, oh, that's
I do an hour a day, and my first draft was like 5.5 months.
Yeah.
And then like maybe a month of edits. And
it's not bad at all. Like, that's like,
no, I don't know if I'd want to be faster than that, because I very much believe that you just have to kind of let it breathe a little bit and not force it. Because I feel like if I work too hard, then I'm forcing it. And I'm like, I'm making up the story that's not supposed to be here.
Yes.
As opposed to kind of just letting the story come.
Yeah. And that is when I find my best moments in a book come when I am doing something like completely different.
Right. 100%.
And it's so frustrating because, I'm like a taskmaster. So I'm like, think of the good idea right now,
Which is just, it shuts your brain down.
It does. And then I'll be like, out for a run or whatever. And all of a sudden, and I won't even be thinking about it. And it pops into my head. But anyway, those are all tricks of the trade, which everyone can learn. Check out Unbound Writers and all the things that are there. And I guess we should open up for questions. I'm sorry. We've been chatting on and on. Do we have questions?
We have a few questions so far. So Francis and Beatrice want to both say how much they're enjoying the interview. Michael has a question, and you already touched on this topic, but maybe you'll want to expand a bit on it. Michael says, I love the book. It had a very innovative and creative use of video. How did that come about, and was your publisher resistant?
Yeah, and I do think we kind of addressed it. No, they weren't really resistant. I think the only thing that made me scared about the QR codes is, I had to deliver to the publisher the images of the codes, and I had to make sure, like, how is this going to look? How is this going to work? And really make sure that I didn't delete those videos. And then how is this going to look on Kindle? And figure out, like, do we need to explain this? And so we ended up adding an author's note at the beginning of the book saying, hey, when you get to this QR code, treat it like you treated restaurant menus in 2020. So just take out your phone. But it's still, my guess is like less than 10% of people are scanning those. But if you do, great. But if you don't miss anything.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, Carter, we did have a question submitted in advance, and you actually kind of already touched on this one as well. But because
Wendy's such a good interviewer.
That's right. Wendy did a great job. But this person wants to know if you could talk a little bit more about your writing process. Some things you've already kind of touched on, but how often do you write? And do you write on a computer? Do you write using a notebook? Things along those lines.
I can't imagine handwriting anything. I handwrite a grocery list and my hand starts cramping up. And it's changed over the years, but for the last few years, I basically go to the same coffee shop every morning around 7:30 in the morning and sit there for an hour with a laptop in my lap, and then I leave. And I do that 7 days a week with maybe a week's worth of exception over the course of a year. And it's my one of my favorite parts of the day because I get up and I'm like excited because I don't know what happens next. I get to see like what happens next. Um, some days I just sit there because I don't know what happens next and I don't want to force it. So there's days where you're just kind of jotting notes, you're just looking out the window. It's important to have those days as well. Don't, I mean, I'm sure Wendy, you run into where you're just like, if I write now, it's going to be something I know I'm going to delete.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I actually, need a little more time, just like an hour. I wouldn't even like be settled in. But I think it's what you train yourself to do as
Right,
well.
right, totally. It's like
For me,
working
I'm
out,
like,
right?
yeah,
You
it's like
build the
exact.
muscle to whatever works for you.
Yeah, like I need to know I have a long stretch so that if I do get stuck, that's okay because I know I have, this block of time. It's whatever you get used to doing, I think, and what you train yourself really to do. And
Yeah, and you have
learn.
to have the confidence to be like, this is my process. Don't think about
Yes.
how other people do it. If it's working for you, then just do it. I mean, but I think consistency is the key. However much you write, I think you got to do it really as frequently as possible.
Yeah. And I have to like pump a draft out in like 5 or 6 weeks once I
Oh,
have,
Jesus.
yeah.
That sounds
So I'll get like
terrible.
the plot and then I'm like, I have to get it out. I have to get it out. And then I'll, it can take a lot of time of revising and thinking it through, but it's like I won't sleep until I have it on the
No.
page. It's like but I'm sure I could change that and I would like to change it. I think I'm gonna start doing now.
Well, it's
Don't
interesting
tell
that
my publisher.
you're
Sorry.
you're, you're both such successful authors, and yet you have such different ways of going about it. So it's
Yeah,
interesting.
that's pretty true. And all the authors I've interviewed, everybody's different, which is why I'm a firm believer. Like when in my teaching, I don't sit there and say this is how you write a novel because there's a million ways to write a novel. You have to find I can tell you how I write a novel, and maybe that will have some information in it. And Wendy could tell you how she writes hers. But
Yeah.
everyone's got to and that's part of the joy of writing is that discovery of who you are as a writer.
Yeah.
If you were just trying to be mechanical because you read a book that said here's exactly how you do it, I don't know how you find the joy there.
Yeah. Judy in the chat says this sounds like a great book, and I'm looking forward to reading it. She says,
Thank you,
thank you
Judy.
both. And Carter, I'm looking on Goodreads right now. This book has a 3.99 rating. So
Oh,
Wow,
we
shit,
need
that's
a
one
number
of we need
four.
one of the viewers to go on to Goodreads and let's get this to an even 4.0. Okay.
Yeah,
We're so
that's
close.
the curse of
of
when you get more and
yes.
more reviews. It starts out at like 4.5, and it just
Stop.
starts. The more all of a sudden you have 1,000 reviews, you're like it's not a four anymore because
I know.
Well, I'm
the
rounding up.
cynics came in.
3.99
That's
is pretty darn close to
on
four.
yeah, and on Goodreads is notoriously low.
Yeah.
So to have
There,
a 4 on Goodreads is really,
Yeah.
Oh
really.
yeah. Your ratings, I mean, your ratings on some of the other sites are even higher. And
Oh yeah,
book
sure.
got great reviews. So as we start to wind down, and hopefully I'm not stepping on your toes, Wendy, but
No,
Wendy
no,
and
please.
Carter, can you let us know what's next for you? Are you guys working on any projects at the moment?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, I've co-written a YA thriller that we're trying to figure out what to do with. And I just finished the draft of a new standalone that I'll be giving to my agent, hopefully in a couple weeks. So we'll see what she says, and we'll see if anyone wants to buy it.
Right. And
What
Wendy?
about you, Wendy? You've got a lot
Yes.
going on.
Yeah, so I have another like traditional print novel coming out next January 2026 called Blade, which is um drawn from my own personal experience training for figure skating at a sort of a training facility in Colorado Springs, actually. Um, and I've turned that into a very dark, dark thriller. Um, and then I also have hopefully in September, I think. We don't have an official date yet, but in the fall, I'll have another Audible audio play called The Room Next Door.
So
And
cool.
yeah, and it's similar to Mad Love. It is this one will be longer, but it mixes narration with scripted scenes with full cast and sound effects, so that um, it's a little bit of a different take on an audiobook. You feel as though you're listening to a movie or a TV series.
That's got to be so much fun.
It's really fun, and this one is a totally different format. I haven't seen it done before, and I did parts of it in Mad Love, where each chapter is a different character, but it's all narration with pops of dialogue that are sort of set up by the character. So you feel like hopefully you feel like you are being told a story by these three different
That's so
characters,
cool.
and then getting to go back and actually hear the scenes with the actors. It's fun. So hopefully, yes, that will be coming in August. So, I mean, it's in the fall of 2025.
That's
So
so great. I
yeah,
can't wait.
Yeah, fingers
yeah,
crossed for
me
that,
too.
Wendy.
Yeah, thank you.
And so, Carter and Wendy, where can the audience learn more about you and your books? We have websites, I imagine, and we're on social media. Where should folks look for you?
Yeah, for me, just carterwilson.com and unboundwriter.com.
And I am wendywalkerbooks.com is my website, and all of my social media sites are listed there. But I'm on, mostly Instagram is my main venue. And I think I'm Wendy Walker author there. So
Uh, so,
find
uh,
us.
yeah. So, folks, let's give Carter and Wendy a big virtual round of applause for a great conversation. I'm keeping my eye on the chat and Q&A, but I think we're pretty much good. Carter and Wendy, do you have any last words for the audience before we wrap things up?
No, just everybody go out and buy this book. You are going to love it. It's really phenomenal. And it's so much fun for me to be able to be a part of your launch and to see, the success that you're having with this book and with your career over many years. But it's so well deserved and
Oh, thank you, Wendy. And I have such gratitude and appreciation for you and for doing this and for Author Hour. And Robert, thank you. And it's
yes,
just
thank you.
We just have to sit in a place of gratitude a lot because sometimes it's hard to believe that any of this is happening.
So
Yes.
Carter, Wendy, thank you so much. As Wendy said, folks, go out and buy a copy of Carter's book. Tell Me What You Did, which, as they mentioned, Barnes and Noble just selected as one of its book picks for February 2025. So very exciting news. So Carter, congrats on the Barnes and Noble news. Have fun visiting all those stores. And folks, for those watching live, look for the feedback survey in about when you exit the Zoom, and look for the follow-up email with the recording and the link to Wellesley Books in about 45 minutes. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night and their weekend. Thank you, Carter.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Appreciate
everybody.
it.
Thanks for having
Bye.
us.
Yeah.